It's 1 p.m., so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Educator Preparation and Licensure Subcommittee of the State Board of Education. Subcommittee members joining us today are Mr. Bob Eby and Mr. Mike Edwards. Thanks to all who are joining us to hear some very important presentations, as always, from State Board and TDOE team members. We do have a lot to cover, but before we begin, I do want to turn to Dr. Sarah Morrison for some opening remarks. Dr. Morrison.
Thank you, Lillian. I will be very brief because, as you mentioned, we've got a packed agenda as we usually do for this subcommittee. There's just a lot of work that runs through the state board related to licensure and preparation. So we're grateful, as always, both for our state board team bringing together some important items, as well as our partners at the Department of Education. So look forward to the conversations. I won't hang us up any longer, but we'll turn it back over to you to begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Just the usual reminders, especially for the presenters, to please state your name and title for the record, and board members, you can certainly jump in. We're not standing on the usual ceremonial processes that we do in our regular board meetings. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Erica Light for Educator Preparation Report Card updates. Erica?
All right, thank you. First of all, I'm Erica Light, the Senior Research Associate for the State Board of Education, and I just want to give a brief overview of our agenda today. We'll be starting with some Educator Preparation Report Card updates, which will be from me. Then Amy Owen will give us a preview of some upcoming SBE items involving NTPA cut scores and LEA teacher training program rules. After that, we will have a presentation from the Tennessee Department of Education about their EPP Innovation Grants and Reading 360 Summit. Then we will have a presentation from me with a brief summary of the presentations that I recently gave at the Fall TACTI conference, and we will round out the meeting with a discussion with members of the TACTI Executive Board. So, starting off with Educator Preparation Report Card updates. The big update is mostly that the scoring is going to be similar to what it was last year. So the provider impact domain, which is the domain that includes teacher evaluation data, will be unscored again this year. We do have teacher evaluation data from the most recent school year, and we will include that in the report card, except in the case where teachers have chosen to nullify their LOE. But in any cases where the teachers have not chosen to nullify their LOE, that will be included. It is just not going to have a score associated with it. EPPs will also not receive an overall rating. This is due to our business rule that we've had in place for several years now, where EPPs must have data on all scored domains in order to receive an overall rating. Normally, the provider impact domain is the domain with the most points associated with it. So without having a score in that domain, it did not seem appropriate to give an overall rating. EPPs will also still receive ratings for several domains, including candidate profile, employment and retention, and candidate assessment. That is the same scoring situation that we had last year. We had our first meeting of the Report Card Advisory Council on September 14th, and that group will be meeting again on October 20th, which is coming up next week. This group includes representatives from several EPPs, including public, private, and alternative route EPPs. We also have State Board Vice Chair Bob Eby in that group. We have representatives from the Department of Education, from THEC, and from several partner organizations. At our September 14th meeting, we had a lively discussion about primarily the provider impact and candidate assessment domains. First, we discussed the availability of data for provider impact and asked the council to weigh in on when they feel it would be appropriate to resume scoring the provider impact domain. The general consensus among the council was that we should wait until we have 2 years of data that are relatively unaffected by COVID-19 before we resume scoring this domain. So in that case, the data that we had from last school year would not count as one of those 2 years. This year is still in process, so too early to make a call on that at this point. Candidate assessment, we decided to, or we had a discussion about pass rates and how those are reported. Currently, pass rates published in the report card reflect the percentage of candidates who pass the required licensure assessments within 2 attempts. The master plan this year for the state board calls for publishing first-time pass rates by EPP on content area licensure assessments. So one thing that we don't want to do is have the report card become really confusing with having multiple versions of the same metric. So we discussed the possibility of having this first-time pass rate published in a separate document from the main report card so that people don't get confused about the difference between that pass rate and the pass rate that we've been reporting on the report card the past few years. We also will need to figure out how to appropriately report pass rates for job embedded candidates. In this case, with job embedded candidates, they most of the time need to do their content area assessment before they enroll in their preparation program. And that's because job embedded candidates, as the name suggests, they go into the classroom as a teacher of record pretty much as soon as they enroll in their program. So they need to show that they have that content knowledge before they even start their program. So in the case of these candidates, it's not really appropriate to attribute their content knowledge that they have at the beginning, like before they've even started their program. It's not appropriate to attribute that to the program that they are just beginning. So we'll need to think about the appropriate way to report that. There was also a concern about add-on endorsements. We currently have in TN Compass, which is the Department of Education's licensure tracking portal, we can tell if someone got an add-on endorsement, which is something other than what they were originally trained to teach. If they get it later, then they get their original license. But there are some candidates who get additional endorsements that their EPP did not necessarily train them for at the same time that they get their initial license. And we currently don't have a very good way to determine which candidates have received an endorsement in that way. So that's another thing we will need to take into account when publishing this information.
Erica, can I just add a couple of points on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and let me say, it was, the advisory council is always a very interesting meeting. I mean, you hear from everybody across the state, all the EPPs, and with regard to the endorsements, a good example that they gave, which I wouldn't have thought about, is a person is trained in history, but they decide on their own that they also want to take an endorsement, say, in physics, and they weren't trained in physics, and they pass the history the first time they take it, but they don't pass the physics. Why should we penalize the EPP by showing that they didn't pass the first time when they weren't even trained by the EPP in physics? So I think that was a good example of why, why we ought to look at things like that.
And if I may also jump in, the reason that this was in the state board master plan, and I know Erica can elaborate on this, but there are some candidates who might take the assessment once, not pass it, and there ends their interest in becoming a teacher. So we might be missing out on folks who did go through the training, took it once, and whether for discouragement or lack of funds or lack of time, they don't come back and take it that second time in order to potentially pass and get licensed. So that's why there was the initial interest as we're thinking about how to increase the teacher pipeline in these folks who don't pass on the first attempt. So it feels like it's good information to have, but as Erica and Bob have been sharing, there are a lot of caveats with how we look at this.
And that's another reason why we wanted to think of publishing this separately from the report card, because this is more for informational purposes to try to learn more about how the teacher pipeline is functioning in Tennessee rather than as an accountability tool the way the report card is.
Just to jump in there too, I mean, I think where we see ed prep programs really doing a great job of getting candidates to pass on the first time, that's something we want to look into in terms of how they're aligning their courses and their preparation to some of those content exams in particular. You know, we'll have to continue to be in a posture of making sure the content exams are really measuring what we want them to measure in terms of meaningful content to become a teacher. But assuming that they are, then that's an important metric to understand where we see EPPs really doing a great job on that first time pass rate. Because as Amy said, it can be discouraging. There's kind of a national push to look at that because I think it does require a level of thoughtfulness and preparation on the EPP's part to make sure that most of your candidates really are able and prepared to pass on that first attempt.
All right. Another topic that we discussed during this meeting was potential new features of the report card. The number one thing that folks in this group would like to see at this time is N counts, which is basically just for each metric, they want to be able to see how many people are included in this metric. We used to have this back before the report card was redesigned 2 years ago. It ended up being dropped off of the most recent design, and last year, due to some technical issues, we were not able to add it back in. So this year, we are working very early on with our vendor to be able to put this feature back in so that everyone who is using the report card will be able to see how many candidates are included in each metric. Another feature we would like to add, which will be quite simple but potentially useful, is to indicate which programs offer a fully online teacher or instructional leader certification. So this is just something we would ask EPPs about. Just ask them, do you offer a fully online program? And they can say yes or no. And then we will put this on the part of the report card page that provides basic information about the provider. Finally, we had a discussion about the possibility of adding candidate spotlight, which would be a section where EPPs can provide information about, including potentially a photo of an outstanding candidate or recent graduate of their program. The idea for this came from EPPs in the past who have wanted to highlight folks that have graduated from their program and have gone on to get accolades such as Teacher of the Year or other outstanding things like that. There was some concern among advisory council members about adding a feature like this just because it seems like to some folks that it was a strange thing to have in what's mostly an accountability document. So we'd be interested in hearing members' views about, do you think that this type of thing would be appropriate to have on the report card, or is the state really too far removed from this type of individual candidate spotlight for us to have something like this?
I'll jump in. Or Mike, are you trying to speak?
Jump in.
What I was going to say when I first read this, Erica, I thought my reaction was I don't know that it's appropriate to include it on the report card. And then I found myself saying, would there be consistency across all EPPs in what the criteria would be? Would we ask them to include the same type of information if assuming everyone agreed that this was the right thing to do? They have their own, we have a page on the report card, if memory serves me right, where EPPs can add information that they'd like to add to highlight particular items of note for their program. Perhaps this would be a spot where that could go. That's just a few of the thoughts that popped into my head. Just not sure that it should be a part of the accountability part of the report card. Thank you.
You know, some of the superlatives that teachers get, they're great. I mean, they're really cool, but they're not, they kind of get awarded. Like Channel 10 has Teacher of the Week, but I'm not sure that it is based on anything other than kind of popularity and the number of phone calls or the emails they get and the votes, sort of like the Player of the Week type thing. But I would think it would be extremely important for the schools to add it to their marketing material, and for not just marketing, but for their overall communication as to what a great college of ed they have, and all the prominent alumni. If we're going to put it on our site, it needs to be some sort of objective those awards that are coming from an objective source.
Yeah, I think the general consensus of most of the people there agree with the two of you. What you're saying is that the state board side is an accountability side, and there is on the site for the particular EPP, there's a link to their homepage that they could have that on their homepage. I would like to address one other point, the reason about the in counts, Erica, to give a little better explanation in case people wondering why you would put the in counts on there. One of a good example of that is, say, special ed. So the larger institutions may have what's reported right now is, we may say 6% of their teachers go into special ed. And that may be 10 teachers or something like that. Whereas for the smaller institutions, they may have 8 teachers going, or 5 teachers going into special ed, and that's actually 30% or 40% of their teacher population. And so the issue there is, by giving the in counts, it allows you to get a perspective. Again, one of the intents of the report card is for potential teachers to look and say, I want to go to this school because it provides what I'm looking for. And so by having the in counts in there, it gives them a little better perspective of the actual numbers as well as the percentages. So that was the reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Before we move on, any other questions or comments about this topic?
We'll give you all, we usually have another licensure and prep subcommittee before the report card launch on February 15th of each year. So Erica and I will circle back and give you basically what's the final verdict coming out of the advisory council, out of your advice, and out of our work with our vendor. So you'll be able to know what some of the final decisions are on these things before it's published.
And as Erica and Amy said, there's a advisory council meeting on, was it the 20th or 21st of October? If there's anything
The 20th, yes.
if there's anything that you want me to take back, Mike or Lillian or anybody, I'm happy to do that. Just let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. If there are no other comments or questions about this, I will hand it over to Amy to discuss upcoming state board items.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica. And good to see you, Madam Chair and members. Always great to talk with y'all. I'm going to talk about 2 items that are coming up at the state board meeting at the end of this month that have some backstory to them, some of which you know about very well as having heard previous subcommittee presentations, but one is quite new for us. So I'll start off with what we're a little bit more used to hearing, which is about EdTPA. And let's see, do I have slide control? Looks like I do. Did y'all see that?
No.
No. Elizabeth, can we go to slide 8, please? For Erica. Thank you. We good? Great.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you. So as you know, the EdTPA is a performance-based assessment. It's a portfolio of educator candidates' pedagogy. So how do they teach their given subject? In most content areas, the recommended score for passing is a 42, and that was recommended several years back by Pearson and the Scale Institute at Stanford, which put the assessment out and which score it. The state board is slated to phase that cut score in this coming January 1st, and we'd be the first state in the nation to adopt that really high bar. We were originally slated to get there this past January, January 1st, 2021. But obviously with COVID related disruptions and challenges to folks who were doing student teaching or clinical placement, we delayed that by 1 year. Unfortunately, we continue to hear from some of our ed preps in different pockets of the state that for candidates engaged in their clinical placement this fall, they are experiencing disruptions due to quarantines, things shifting back and forth, maybe a mentor teacher is out, maybe their usual schools aren't wanting to host student teachers. And we've also had other natural disasters in the state, especially some flooding in West Tennessee that affected a number of schools out that way. So to avoid creating hardships for these educators who happen to be in the pipeline right now, staff are proposing that we maintain our current cut score, which for most rubrics, for most subject areas is at a 40, until January 1st of 2023. We would still be among the very top states in the country for cut scores. I think it's California is currently at a 41. We're right behind them as the next highest in the country. We believe that the EdTPA is an important assessment. It is well aligned with the team rubric, with what educators experience once they get into the classroom. And as I'm going to go into a moment, we have some state-specific research that we really have parity between different racial and ethnic groups of educators on the EdTPA, which is not always true on other licensure assessments. So, we want to make sure that we are continuing with EdTPA implementation, but in a way that recognizes the times that we're in and that does not move the bar while we're in the middle of, our ongoing situation. So on our next slide, and hopefully y'all saw that one switch. Great. Erica shared this data with the group at TACD a few weeks ago, and I'm just going to review it now. You've seen versions of these slides before. This is looking at our cohorts of educator candidates and whether they scored below a 37, between a 37 and 39, in that 40 to 41 range, or above a 42 over time. And it has both the percentages and the raw numbers. So as you can see, we have the vast majority of our educator candidates are already meeting that 42 or higher cut score, but we would be missing out on educators who currently pass at that 40 to 41 level if we increase to 42 this January 1st. Right now, as you can see in bold for the 2018-19 cohort, that was about 125 teachers, which grand scale is not a huge number, but we know that every single educator candidate counts in these times when we're trying to get and keep as many teachers in the building as we can. And I'll go through a little bit more data and then feel free to have any questions. We also noticed that ed prep providers that implemented EdTPA very early on, so about 8 years ago now, are seeing their candidates have higher scores and pass rates, both at the current cut score and at the potential cut score of 42, than those that began implementing a little bit later on. So again, we don't want to penalize prep that may not have been implementing EdTPA for as long, particularly when the pandemic began. We really see that it does take a few years to get up to speed in terms of how you support your candidates in developing these portfolios for EdTPA. Oops, that's about where I wanted to stop on this issue, but please do let me know if you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns about this plan. This is something that staff are working to put together for the October 29th board meeting. It would need to be on first and final reading, which is part of why we wanted to have a public discussion about this matter now ahead of time, because our next scheduled quarterly meeting is not until February of 2022, when the higher cut score would have already gone into effect. So I'll pause there. What questions or comments do y'all have?
Amy, can you go back one slide?
Or let's see, can I? Yes, I can.
Okay, so if we kept it at 40, and the numbers were the same as 2018, 2019, we would be missing out on potentially 125 potential teachers, correct?
Correct.
Do we have this data by demographics? Because we know that various demographic groups, it's the importance of having teachers within school systems that represent the demographic groups. Do we have that data based on that?
We do. Erica will talk about this a little bit later on when we get to the presentations we gave to TACD. We gave a very in-depth presentation on statewide EdTPA data trends at the TACD conference. And part of what she's going to share is that all of the members are welcome to ask for copies of our presentations. We really saw, and Erica, correct me if I go astray, that for the current cut score, we actually do not see a gap between white teachers and teachers of color in terms of their pass rate that is statistically significant. And I think that's held true for 2 years, for the last 2 cohorts. Great. So that's something that is not necessarily true nationwide, but is true in our data trends in Tennessee. And it speaks to the really tailored work that EdPreps have done figuring out what do each of my candidates need based on their preparation and the background they're coming in with? How can I support them to be successful on this assessment, which again sets them up well for getting into the classroom and having the expectations of the team rubric. The point is not just to pass the EdTPA, the point is to be prepared for the expectations and the rigor once you're in the classroom. So we are seeing those even at our current cut score. We do start to see some gaps emerge if we look at a slightly higher cut score. So that's another reason to potentially give EdPreps another year to think about how they're best serving their candidates to prepare for this assessment.
Thank you. And then the second question I had, you know, with the literacy bill that we have, people, you know, EPPs are charged with teaching the teachers how to teach, obviously. And I actually got a letter today from a constituent with regard to the literacy bill, very similar to what we've read, and the importance of phonics and coding, et cetera. If, you know, when that gets instituted within the EPPs, when would that get picked up on the ed prep, the test, and when would we see that impact? Probably will dip down initially until the ed preps get going. I mean, what's
That's a great question. There will be some items in early 2022 that come to the state board. Part of the special session literacy legislation earlier this year was to say that the state will identify and select a reading licensure assessment. We actually already have one. We have one from Praxis that on some national reviews by groups like NCTQ, the National Council for Teacher Quality. Our current one was actually highly rated. So I will not prognosticate on whether we keep that one or change it or what happens there, but you will see some items brought to you for consideration early in 2022. And that's also something we talked about with the advisory council. We currently show on the candidate assessment domain pass rates on the regular content exam and then pass rates on the literacy content exam separately. Those are combined into a single scored metric, but that's something that in the future, when this has been rolled out and people are prepared for it and it's been implemented, that perhaps literacy is scored on its own in the future. So forthcoming for more discussions, but it's a great point. I don't know that it would affect the EdTPA as a pedagogical assessment. It would be more on the content area assessments.
Thank you.
There are no other thoughts. You will see me present this proposal on October 29th and are obviously welcome to ask more questions then. And the second topic that's coming up at the October meeting that we wanted to give you a preview of, it's a first reading item to establish rules for LEA teacher training programs. Now, this was in response to PC 571 of this most recent legislative session, which takes effect this coming July 1st, 2022, which is why we need to start establishing the rules now so it's in effect when the law requires it to be. This law requires that the state board establish rules that let an LEA or 2 or more LEAs working together establish what are called LEA teacher training programs. So we're getting another acronym, TTPs, not to be confused with EPPs, these are TTPs. I will probably just call them teacher training programs to avoid confusion for now. What the programs are meant to do in law is to allow an educator who already has a professional teaching license to add endorsements to that license by participating in one of these programs. Now, to be clear, if I do have a Tennessee teaching license and I can add an endorsement to it next week just by going and taking and passing the relevant licensure exam. This is because, if you have a middle or high school area endorsement, mine's in history. If I took and passed the English exam, I could add English to my license. However, if I wanted to add special ed or ESL or something else like that, I would need to go back and take classes at an ed prep provider right now. So at one of our colleges, universities, or alt-route programs. What the law is saying is that LEAs can establish teacher training programs to help prepare educators to take and pass the licensure assessments to earn these endorsements. This is not the same as the fact that LEAs can already become an ed prep provider. Rutherford County and Knox County have done that. And what they can do is they can recommend people for initial licensure. So someone who's never been licensed, doesn't have a Tennessee license, is becoming a teacher for the first time, can go through one of those EPPs that are district run. Again, this is for someone who already has a professional level license. Based on the law, they must both earn the recommendation of their LEA's program and pass the required licensure assessments. The proposed rules will have several sections, and we're going to go through them briefly. Just so you know, our staff have worked very closely with the Department of Education. Our goal is to make sure that these programs meet a high quality bar, similar to the bar for specialty area programs at existing EPPs. So for example, not the EPP level requirements to do initial licensure, but if I'm offering history, what are the standards for offering a history endorsement? We're trying to keep it very similar and in line with that. So the rules will have general purpose and definitions, criteria for LEA programs to earn initial approval and to maintain full approval, and then criteria for educators to participate. So stop me as I go if you have questions, concerns, or things you think we should be adding here. The purpose obviously will be pretty straightforward. It will say that we are effectuating the law. The definitions will go through commonly used terms in the rules, LEA, teacher training program, EPP, give those definitions. And then we get into requirements for initial approval for an LEA. So first, the LEA or any LEAs participating and partnering in this cannot have been in the lowest district performance designation in either of the last 2 years in which district accountability scores were generated. This is the same for an LEA that wants to become a full EPP. They also cannot have been in that lowest designation in the last 2 years. So again, that's even if you're making a partnership, if it's a partnership between District A and District B was in that lowest performance designation, they would not meet the requirements for approval, even if District A was higher. The LEAs may, but do not have to, partner with state board approved EPPs. So this is if an LEA wants to partner with an ed prep for a specific type of coursework or programming, or to use a faculty member as an expert, they can do that, but they don't have to. The rule then goes into how the LEAs will submit applications to the department for review, which is very similar to what we do if an organization wants to become an ed prep. They submit that application to the department for review. The application has to provide evidence of program capacity, and we go into that in more detail, which you'll see when you get the rules, and alignment to the specialty area program standards. Again, those are laid out in state board policy. And so they say if you are offering physics, here are the standards you must meet. If you're offering ESL, here are the standards you must meet, and so on. The department has 90 calendar days to review the application and can have some back and forth with the applicant if they need more information. And they'll then recommend either initial approval or denial of initial approval to the state board. And there'll be a window of time that initial approval lasts from 3 to 5 years. And during that time, so after their 3rd year, but before their 5th, that's when the LEA would apply for full approval.
Amy, would you clarify,
Yes.
why do we have a period of initial approval versus allowing them to be approved at the beginning?
It's a great question. Initial approval, it is the exact same as what we do with someone who wants to become an ed prep provider. it is essentially saying, you know, for the EPPs, once you have full approval, we check on your data annually, but you only get a full review every 7 years. And 7 years is a really long time out the gate when you haven't really checked on an organization's performance yet to just check the box and say, go right ahead. So we have this initial approval period where they can enroll folks, they can recommend educators for getting these additional endorsements. They are fully operational, but there's a shorter touch point to go back and make sure that they're having strong quality.
Okay, I understand that. So then we say the initial approval will last 3 to 5 years. So are we going to firm up and say it's 3 years, it's 5 years, or why would we have a range of 3 to 5?
Yeah, that was on a recommendation from the department in terms of how they review ed preps. They establish cycles of when they're looking at ed preps throughout the year. And so it might be that LEA program A got approved in February and LEA program B got reviewed in October, but we're trying to sync up their cycle. So for that first initial approval cycle, it may vary a little bit. We also wanted to account for the fact that perhaps in their first 3 years or their first 2 years, they don't get a lot of people enrolling. So they want to wait till after year 4 when they have more results to report.
Okay, and then during this initial period, will we be reviewing them at any point in time, given the fact that this is their first time doing this, being initially approved? Will we have any time period to do an initial review, whether it's every other year, especially as you indicated, they may have a low enrollment?
That's a great question. I've flipped the next slide because every year, whether they're in initial approval status or full approval status, these programs will submit data to the department, which they will need to include in a regular report to the state board. And the terms of the rule lay out some more specific details on when those occur and what the data are. So at any time during that initial approval period, if we're seeing things really go awry, you know, very low pass rates on the licensure exam, lack of evidence of capacity, significant changes to the program, that's something where we'd be able to first provide technical assistance and see how there would be support, but potentially change that recommendation to denial of initial approval.
Thank you.
You bet. Along those lines for full approval, so after that, you know, the 3 to 5 year period, you're in your initial approval and then you are applying for full approval and then you're trying to maintain full approval. So full approval reviews would be every 7 years, similar to the existing cycle for EPPs. Part of that's to maintain consistency of expectations, also consistency of workload, because the department is charged with monitoring and supporting these programs. So more frequent reviews would be certainly challenging, depending on the volume of programs that apply. During those full approval cycles, the department will be looking for continued evidence of alignment to the preparation standards, which include both those specialty area standards, but also standards for professional learning. How are they approaching their teacher candidates? The in-task standards, which are something that ed preps have to comply with. Looking at the records of educators who complete the program. So not just their pass rate on the licensure assessment, but do they stay employed? Do they become employed in the area where they earned endorsement? And what are their evaluation scores and outcomes in that area? And then again, obviously, are they passing their assessments after completing this LEA program? Based on that information, the department would either recommend full approval or denial of approval to the board. And as I mentioned, they'd have these annual data cycles similar to how we have annual reports for ed preps, though not quite on the same scale. Questions there before I turn to requirements for educators? So there's really two sets of requirements for educators that we are proposing on first reading. First is about your requirements to enroll in one of these teacher training programs. And second is requirements to actually obtain the additional endorsement. So to enroll in the program, you must hold an active professional level Tennessee educator license and be employed full-time by the LEA that's operating the program. Or if several LEAs are working together, you must be employed by one of them. This is a little different with our current programs like Rutherford and Knox that are ed preps, that are full EPPs. They can enroll candidates from outside their existing jurisdictions who are not employed by their district because they are operating just like, you know, a college or university ed prep, taking folks from all over. For these teacher training programs, our proposal initially, and we will obviously get feedback about this from the members and during the rulemaking process, is that we limit this to educators that are actually employed by the LEA that's offering the program. That's to make sure that they can easily provide mentorship, that if they need to have flexible schedules to go teach another class or observe another class, they're able to make that happen within their own boundaries. And also just that these are a new type of program. And so starting small with folks who are already in your LEA who you can work with more flexibly seemed advisable to opening it up from folks all across the state.
Point for clarification, Amy. If an educator decides to leave and go to another position in another nearby school district, it sounds like they would be dropping out of this particular LEA program based on what you just said. Go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
Will the rule include that language so it's crystal clear to candidates?
We can certainly either embed that now, or if you want to make that recommendation again on the record during the meeting, we can do that as well. We thought about that, but these are not, you know, a 4-year program like a college or university. Most of these would probably take one academic year or maybe a summer on both or either end. So ideally, we would see fewer people transition midway through the year, but I agree it would happen.
I'm not saying that.
Seems like all you have to do is change that very first to enroll in an LEA, just say to enroll and sustain in an LEA TTP, because the second bullet down says be employed full-time by the LEA. And then if they move out of the LEA, unless they go into another one that is full-time, then they wouldn't qualify.
So will these teachers that are enrolling, will they be paying any tuition to anyone?
That would be up to the LEA teacher training program. As they are developing their content and their programming, it would be at their discretion to determine, is this something that we are offering educators in our district because we want to help people who are teaching history transition to teaching ESL or biology or something else because we need those folks in those openings more. Or is it something that would have some sort of charge to it because it is further education and it will likely take some funding to establish these programs on the part of the LEA?
The reason I ask is if they were to have paid a tuition for a course that they're not allowed to complete, seems like they would have a claim to a reimbursement.
Yeah, that's a good point that I'll definitely bring up with our colleagues at DOE as well. Right now we have it phrased that they could enroll, and so even if I changed jobs, changed districts midway through, in theory you could complete that coursework. You know, you've enrolled, you're in it, so you could complete the program. But as Bob pointed out, you would not be able to take that last step at the end of obtaining the additional endorsement if you have moved out of the LEA that was offering the program. Because again, to obtain the endorsement, you would still have to have the active professional Tennessee teaching license, submit that recommendation by the LEA program where they're employed and where they trained, and have the passing scores on the praxis exam.
Well, in a college or university scenario, theoretically, those credits could transfer to your next, where you resume training. It'd be a problem if they just go away.
Yeah, we definitely need to think that through, or if they count as professional development points or just as additional gained knowledge in some way. Although I definitely hear what you're saying, that it would seem, if it were me, I would be frustrated. It would feel like I had spun my wheels essentially on spending that time and money.
But you're the one making the choice to go to the other LEA. I mean, it's not, so cognitively, you're going to decide, well, if I go, I'm giving this up. But, I mean, that's just an employment decision.
But I
Yeah.
think it is, as you point out, something worth clarifying, whether it's in the rule or guidance. Need to think through with some of our brilliant colleagues who I know will have some ideas on this as well. But that's a helpful point.
Great. Amy, one other question related to the endorsements that the LEAs may offer.
Mhm.
I don't see anything yet, and I may have missed it, where there may be language that is specific to the type of endorsement that the LEA may offer, similarly to what the additional pathway that the TDOE is offering. We had it limited in scope, and they would go through a process of potentially adding more at a future date. But I don't see anything here, and I don't know if the legislation restricts that, prevents that, et cetera. So would you help us to understand that?
You bet. The law is pretty open on this, and we've spoken with some of the folks who were supportive of this legislation, with the School Board Association and with others as well. The intent is really that it is for academic teacher licenses, which means everything except CTE occupational or school services personnel. That's because for CTE occupational, the requirements are very specific to the industry and are much more about your skill in that industry area, whether it's cosmetology or welding or anything else like that. And then for school services personnel, folks like an audiologist, a school psychologist, a school counselor, their programs often require master's level training and are very, very specific and content heavy as well. So those are not included under this umbrella, but the academic areas are. So elementary, middle, high school, special ed, ESL, anything that's not an occupational or school services personnel type of license.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not point out that we had a lot of heartburn over special education and having the department offer special education. And they went back and did a lot of due diligence with regard to how that was outlined for the board over time and subsequently was approved. Will there be similar restrictions and items put in place that would be similar to what TDOE is required to do? Would LEA have the same expectations?
So the LEAs would need to provide what we call evidence of program capacity, which, as I mentioned, it goes into more detail in the rule itself. And the department will be developing the rubric by which they evaluate programs for initial approval. So you have to show your alignment with the specialty area program. And then evidence of capacity might include who is teaching this course, what are their credentials, what does your mentoring program look like, what prerequisite knowledge or experience do you expect candidates to have. So I know when we talked about special education for the department program, we said you could get the interventionist endorsement, based on having already had a teaching license. But if you were looking at that more comprehensive setting, you had to already have had a special ed endorsement available or that you've been teaching with. So that's something that we can think about, especially as the department develops the review rubric and which areas might need more intensive focus. I would want to consult with Angie Sanders, our general counsel, in terms of what we would be able to put in rule so that we are not getting into limiting the scope of the law. As always, we want to be in compliance with what is the legislative charge here.
I certainly appreciate that and understand that we have to do that. But certainly based on what I just said, I certainly urge you all to dig in and see where we can in law, based on not being in violation of the law, do what we need to do, similarly to how we viewed this during the time we were working closely with the TDOE. So thank you.
At the end of the day, this candidate will receive an endorsement not to teach that subject in that LEA, but anywhere in Tennessee.
That is correct.
Which means that credential really needs to be absolutely valid compared to any other any other EPP that they would be awarded it.
I agree. I think that was part of why the decision was made in the law to require these candidates to take the same licensure assessments as anyone who is seeking to add an endorsement through another pathway, so that we do have that as additional evidence of their competence and knowledge in the subject area. And it's why we've built in this annual data reporting and review requirements of not just are they passing the exam, but are they gaining employment, and what are their actual outcomes in the classroom if they switch to their new content area.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of the game here, but just as we hold EPPs accountable and have report cards, I presume we would have some similar plan for LEAs, or we working on something?
So it's interesting. The report card really focuses on candidates for initial licensure who are in their very first 3 years in the classroom. We have always said this for our traditional EPPs as well. It's more complicated to evaluate someone who's gotten an additional endorsement because the programs to do that, even among EPPs, look very different, and it's a little bit harder to attribute. Is my knowledge really from my initial teacher prep that taught me my pedagogy and my strategies in the classroom? Is it from the place where I got the content knowledge from the new endorsement? Is it from district PD that I've just gotten in the last 8 to 10 years of my career? So I don't know that there would be a report card. I think that having an annual report is certainly appropriate that compares among these programs, but it's just trickier to look at outcomes once folks have already been in the classroom for a while.
And I understand that, and I think at the board meetings, I question, I mean, somehow we've got to be able to figure out a way to evaluate how effective those programs are in preparing the teachers when they go out, and how, and maybe it's through their level of effectiveness, their performance or something, I don't know, but by adding this, I'm all for adding this. I think we need to have, to fill the teacher pipeline, but we hold others accountable. We've got to figure out a way to evaluate that this program is being effective as we want it.
I fully agree.
I agree as well. I think it will be interesting to see what the volume of interest looks like in this. I don't know that we have a good gauge on it right now, simply because districts have so much to handle at the moment. We've got the pandemic, we have everything else going on, we have all these shifts with technology. I'm very curious about how many LEAs will be interested in opening one of these programs, and if it's a trickle rather than a deluge, maybe the reporting looks different. Maybe there can be more intensive support for programs early on if there's just a few, but I think that will partially dictate our response as well. Yeah, I think it's just going to be interesting. Something is also to note is that this is helping existing professional level teachers potentially make shifts into other roles in their districts, but it could also just help them have more tools in their tool belt of saying, I've gotten some additional training to work with the English learners who I already have in my existing classroom. So even if they don't change job positions, that's not necessarily an indication that something has gone awry.
Just to jump in, I'm like with Amy, I'll be curious to see who and how many kind of jump on board for this new pathway. My hunch is that it will be a slow trickle, which will also give us the ability to work closely with those first sort of adopters of this model. I think having the licensure assessment is a key, just like with the department's pathway. I mean, we're going to have consistent data across different types of offerings, if you will. And then at least to some extent, looking at those teacher effectiveness scores and trying to understand maybe there's some sort of more qualitative review that we do initially with some of the early adopters. But I think hopefully we'll have the chance to really learn with the first few that sign up over the next few years. But my guess, like Amy, is that it's probably going to be a bit of a slow trickle, not a mad rush. I could be wrong. And now that I've said it, I probably will be wrong, but your points are well taken. I think we do have to continue to think about both the objective and sort of the qualitative measures that we can use to gauge effectiveness and understand, what a quality program looks like in this pathway.
I think the bottom line, as I recall, when the department brought this program and we approved the pathway, is to help fill the pipeline for the students. And the bottom line is we want the students to have one of our master plan goals is to have best teachers in the classroom we can have. And if you can't evaluate it, how do you know if you got it or not? That's my one point.
No, that's right. I mean, I think we have to keep that big picture in mind. I mean, the idea with both the department sponsored pathway and this one, which are different. This one was through the law allowing districts to do a similar pathway, but similar results. We just need to have the appropriate guardrails, but hopefully, spur some some different types of programs that do prove to be effective, and continue to think about and look at the various measures that are available to evaluate them. Definitely.
Thanks.
Well, we will certainly incorporate as much of your feedback as we can before the items come out to you all on Friday and are posted on our website on this following week. I would also just encourage, I know we've got our TACTI executive board on. I would encourage any ed preps that have feedback on this and any districts that are interested in opening one of these programs to participate in our rulemaking process. We will get a rulemaking hearing scheduled and posted on our website where anyone can comment, and they can also email feedback directly to our general counsel. And all of that gets shared with the board members ahead of their votes on these items. So just be on the lookout for that if you have detailed feedback you'd like to share. And with that, I think we've had questions along the way, but any final ones? Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your engagement on this.
Thank you, Annie.
Dr. Annie Insana. Annie, you're muted, I think.
Can you all hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Annie Insana. I'm Senior Director of Educator Preparation with the Tennessee Department of Ed. Good afternoon. Happy to talk with you all today about where we've been and where we're going with our ed prep work and engagement specifically. So today we'll be talking a little bit about our EPP Innovation Grant, a bit about our Reading 360 Summit, and some outcomes from our TACTI conference that just occurred virtually at the end of September. So as mentioned by previous members earlier in the conversation, there is a number of requirements within the new legislation, the Tennessee Literacy Success Act, focused on ed prep providers. And these are a couple of the call-outs that we'll talk about today. So beginning August 1st, EPPs must provide training in reading instruction for grades K through 3 for both general and special education and instructional leader candidates. And there are a couple areas to focus on. The three critical areas: foundational literacy skills, high quality instructional materials, and behavior management through trauma-informed principles will really be the focus today. But also, as called out, are requirements for ed prep to consider how they are supporting students with advanced reading skills and students with significant reading deficiencies, how to identify characteristics of dyslexia and providing effective instruction, and also the administration of the universal reading screener and use of the resulting data for improving reading instruction. So State Board has been very actively involved with many of these items. In July 2021, State Board just passed on final read the additional EPP Literacy Standards. It's important to note here too, back in 2017, State Board passed a very rigorous and robust set of literacy standards for early childhood, elementary, and special education and instructional leader programs. And the additions that were just passed last summer really focused on those three critical areas to really enhance the support and the requirements for ed prep providers in that regard. So again, these are these standards in direct response to legislation and requirements really start quickly, August 2022. And there's quite a bit of work that EPPs have already begun to engage in. Most notably, back in the spring, the EPP Innovation Grant was launched, and grant funds were awarded to UTK and Deans for Impact to help develop courses and/or integrated content focused on those three critical areas. There are 4 grants that were awarded in total for $642,000 spread across of those 4 grants. The idea behind the EPP Innovation Grants is that these grantees will develop either full courses or integrated content. And what that means could be a development of modules that can be picked up and used by ed prep providers within preparation in those particular program areas. And it's going to focus on foundational skills, trauma-informed instruction, or high-quality instructional materials. So there were actually 2 grants awarded to UTK, and one grant was focused on a team who is building out integrated content for early childhood and elementary programming, and then another grant for a separate team at UTK for special education interventionists. Yet another team was granted money for the trauma-informed instruction, and they are developing courses and integrated content development across many of our programs: early childhood, elementary, middle school, high school, and instructional leader. And then Deans for Impact was awarded money for integrated content development for the high-quality instructional materials in both the elementary and secondary English language arts space. A great, a really, I think, helpful requirement within the EPP Innovation Grant to be awarded those funds, EPPs were also, or grantees were also required to partner with with at least one partner EPP across the state to pilot the particular content, integrated content or courses. And these 9 listed here, all the grantees have various piloting connections with these EPPs. And what we like to point out here too is the diversity of the EPPs. These grantees are working with both big EPPs, small EPPs, public, private. National Teacher Residency is actually an Educator-related organization, and that's really going to support the work of EPPs to sort of pick up and be able to use these materials into their diverse EPP settings. So another benefit of EPPs sort of picking up this content once it's ready is that this has been really heavily vetted through both external and internal reviewers. We hired somebody on my team, Dr. Bianca Jefferson, to manage this EPP Innovation Grant and to provide that technical support for grantees, as well as to check in with them on a regular basis to ensure what they're developing is in alignment with current standards and expectations regarding the legislation. So again, really exciting work here. I'm going to pause here for just a second on the EPP Innovation Grant work and then talk about 2 different pieces of engagement, most recently with our Ed Prep community.
Annie, can I pause you for, I just have one question on that last slide.
Absolutely.
And I do too. I do too. Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Sarah.
Lillian. No, please go ahead. You go first.
So clarification, when does the grant when does the grant period end, and is it in alignment with the pilot ending? Can you clarify that?
Sure. I believe the grant funds go through the next fiscal year, and these grantees have already begun the work to begin piloting the content with their pilot EPPs. With one exception, I believe Deans for Impact will be piloting in the spring with their EPPs. So very sort of quick turnaround with the development and then the piloting with partners.
Okay, and so in thinking about that, I asked the question because I'm curious about when at the conclusion you say of the grant, all of other EPPs will have an opportunity to have access to that content. And so that's why I was thinking, what is the timing of that? Is it in alignment with August 1st of 2022, or is it just wide open?
Yes, ma'am, it is in alignment with the expectations and legislation. It is a quick turnaround, and the other piece of this too is that the department is working on a proposal process that will be released to the EPP community to demonstrate their alignment, and they can communicate with the department whether or not they're choosing to pick up these materials and use them, or if they're going to select an alternative pathway. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Those are my questions exactly about timing. So it sounds like, Annie, just to sum up what you just said, the piloting will be taking place during this academic year through spring of 2022, and then implementation is expected the following academic year. So, you know, the materials will have to be available next summer, I assume, and then EPPs will be doing this as part of their academic year 22-23, or is it the summer before? When does the training take place once the materials are available?
Yeah, so we're sort of talking through what does access to these materials look like, where will it live, and really working with UTK and Deans for Impact on those particular issues so that, you know, for example, if everybody at the last TACTI meeting, we were polling EPPs on the different learning management platforms that they use and seeing what the feasibility would be to sort of be able to pick up these modules and use them. Should they be placed on our Best for All Central? These are all sorts of questions that we're talking through in terms of access, but we're really trying to nail that down and get that real concrete so that our guidance to the EPP community can be clear on where they will be and when they will be ready to be accessed.
Okay, so it is quick, and it sounds like by next academic year, they should be using these materials one way or another.
That's correct. I know that UTK in particular, they work through the Canvas platform, but have also developed these in like a Google Drive to, again, think through what the access materials might look like and to be able to make it most feasible for EPPs for implementation.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for those clarifying points.
Sure. Great. So other opportunities for engagement with our EPPs has been, many have taken place in September actually. The Reading 360 Virtual Summit took place over 3 days in the third week of September and focused 6 roundtable sessions, all within these critical areas of literacy and implementation. 1 roundtable and 2 breakout sessions were specifically focused on educator preparation and the importance of integrating high quality instructional materials within preparation. Those that took part in that, Dr. David Steiner, Dr. Rebecca Berlin from Deans for Impact, who we will be talking with here in just a couple moments, and then Michael Derline from our Office of Educator Licensure and Preparation. EPPs from across the state were invited to attend that virtual summit, and many of them did and were actively engaged within that summit. Also in September, our virtual TACTI meeting in the fall. This is a list of the plenary session topics that TDOE covered. We always have a lot to say to our community and a lot of updates to provide for them too. But you can see here that a lot of our topics that we covered was really getting EPPs up to speed with these new standards and some of the work coming down the pike. There were a number of literacy resources too that we spoke about. I think one of the most great resources that were provided to EPPs this summer was the opportunity to engage in the same early reading training as was provided for districts over the summer. So they had an opportunity to engage in that same sort of training the first week on asynchronous online, and then the second week hosted by a variety of our EPPs across the state for engagement in person to learn what implementation of those of that content that they were learning within preparation. So a number of resources that we spoke about at TACTI, as well as many other topics unrelated to the legislation in that regard. I think one of the best opportunities provided at TACTI were breakout sessions. So I wanted to circle back to the EPP Innovation Grantees again. During the first and second day of the TACTI breakouts, we had a representation from each one of the 4 grantees be able to present their content and courses within breakout sessions where EPPs could attend and actually be provided tutorials of what the content looked like, be able to ask questions, and really kind of get immersed in what the grantees were developing around these 3 critical areas. So what's most exciting today too is we've invited back our grantees today to just share a little bit about what they have developed, what the intended outcomes will be for candidates should an EPP pick up these modules or these courses and use them within courses, And then also to give some highlights on the work that they've done thus far with their partner EPPs as well. So we're going to hear from each of our representatives from each of the 4 teams today, and they're going to share just a little bit. And I'm going to help facilitate. We'll see if Dr. Filipakos is on the call because I have her listed first, but that does not necessarily mean she needs to go first. Not seeing her on the participant list yet. So why don't we hop down and, oh, Dr. Filipakos, I do see you. Are you ready to present?
Yes, and I'm unmuted now. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. So Annie, is it, shall I start and share or shall I wait a bit?
Yes, please share. Ready to hear all about what you've got going on with your team.
Sure. So as we shared, and it was exciting presenting at TACTI, we were able to be charged to develop the integrated content for pre-K3 and for K5 on foundational skills. And we are at the point where we have designed a total of 23 modules, and I'm going to just name the modules so that you can see the range of foundational skills that we're working on. We begin with a language system with reading argument and concepts of what constitutes reading and how reading develops in the brain, literacy development and what develops, assessments, student data and progress monitoring, concepts of print, phonological awareness, phonics, high-frequency regular and irregular words, advanced decoding, multisyllabic decoding and morphology, orthography and spelling, reading fluency, vocabulary, dialogic reading, comprehension, early writing, writing and syntax, writing and assessment, genre-based writing instruction, text complexity, dyslexia, and bilingualism. So we are targeting a range, actually, and addressing a range of literacy skills and literacy goals. We have partnered up with UT Martin at this first iteration because we're working on 2 iterations, meaning we are doing 2 cycles of development, implementation, collection of data, revisions, so we can apply in the second cycle. So this first cycle, we are working with UT Martin and with Milligan, and we have interviewed faculty in August. We have shared the content. They have collaborated with us to determine which content will be used for what classes, and we are observing their instruction, collecting data from students as well, because each one of the modules we have created on Canvas includes a pre-test, a post-test, readings, a PowerPoint, and a video, a podcast of that PowerPoint. That way we are not asking instructors to try to figure out what to say, but it is already created for them. And we have a video for instructors on how to use the content, videos for students to instill in them the importance of learning content that's based on evidence, because they are the ones who will be teaching the citizens of tomorrow. And we want our students to really have that urgency, but also understand the rigor and the importance of the profession. So we are trying to include all these into the videos we created. And our goal is in December to have exit interviews with the faculty and then work to make revisions in all the content, to have a second cycle of implementation again in the spring, to deliver the content to the state by hopefully by May, but I think it will be much more likely that it will be June, because that's when most of the exams and everything else will be completed from our partners.
Thank you.
Jump in and say, I'm impressed, incredibly impressed with what you just laid out. And thank you so much for the great work that you are doing in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to do this.
If you're taking questions now, or did you want to wait till you got through all of them before you took questions?
Sure, we can take questions now.
So I too was impressed with the list of content things you're adding. My question is, within the curriculum at an EPP, how does this fit into it? Are we taking something out? Are we replacing? Are we adding? How does this fit into the curriculum?
That is an excellent question. Excellent question. So we gave guidelines to our partners, and we did say that they can use flipped classrooms where the students will complete these modules out of class, and when they'll come to class, they will practice. We want them to really practice with activities either from the supplement that the state has or from their partners' curricula that they're using, the high quality instructional materials that their partners are using in their district. Of course, it is a challenge always when we work with instructors because it's difficult to let things go. So at this stage, on this first cycle, we are also learning because we have it structured as a study, so we can see what are the challenges that our partners have when they are using these resources, because it is difficult to let go, and we all teachers, we want to keep things. So next cycle, we will be much more explicit, I would say, based on the information we also learned on what not to keep or what affordances exist. But the guideline was for them to use flipped classrooms or to let go. And one partner of ours actually let go of their textbook. And they said, no, we're going to only use the resources you have and the readings that are part of the module and the activities that are part of the supplement. But again, it's our profession likes to keep everything.
Yeah, this article that I was reading today that was sent to me gave an example of where a college professor said, well, this is all stuff is good, et cetera, but I'm still going to teach the way I want to teach. And so the question is, how do we assure, I mean, that they pick this up and they take it?
Right, and I think that that's a part of a conversation that we started actually last week in our previous meeting. But I think that it's important to provide some professional development, not in the form of professional development, because faculty, they are professionals and this can be very sensitive as a topic. But I think that we need to have a common understanding of what constitutes evidence-based practices, what constitutes high quality instructional materials, what does research means, and how reading really develops, and why nothing can be left to chance. And I think that it will be valuable to do this type of enhanced conversations, if I can call it as such. But from our side, I was sharing with the state that we are considering to develop like a manual for the user. So for each one of the modules to also just point out the things that are must and the things that they cannot be negotiated, because that will be potentially more helpful for instructors.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Zoe. Another opportunity too that we have, the next TACI conference, I believe, is in February. So we intend on bringing our grantees back to share some of the learnings from their pilot implementation, and just to continue with that good mindset work with EPP community, look at these great resources. They're available and ready to use shortly. So appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Dr.
for the
Bell. Dr. Bell, are you on the call? We can transition to you next. I'm not seeing her on there, so I will go ahead and hop over to Dr. Rebecca Berlin. She's with Deans for Impact. And Rebecca, if you can hear me and unmute, we would love for you to just give us a brief overview of your content development, some of the work you've done with your pilot EPPs, and some intended outcomes.
Yeah, I would be happy to. And thanks all for having me. I was really excited to get to share some of this work. The kind of high level overview of the work Deans for Impact is doing is we were awarded the grant focused on high quality instructional materials. So we have kind of a 4-part learning arc laid out for candidates. Part 1 is an introduction to high quality instructional materials, and that's really focused on, can candidates distinguish between high quality instructional materials and things that they might find from like what we all know is happening, like a late night Google or Pinterest search, and can they describe what makes the high quality instructional materials, like what are the design principles that sit under them that makes those distinct from other materials they might find. The second part is on lesson internalization. So during that module, we walk them through a routine that they can use to do the kind of the intellectual preparation or lesson internalization that a teacher does to prepare to teach from high quality instructional materials. The third part is called effortful thinking, and that's about research-based practices that point to the kind of rigor within high quality instructional materials and what a teacher can do to really support their students in making sure they're like meeting the really rich instructional demands in college and career ready standards and in those materials. And the fourth part is called supporting all learners with high quality instructional materials. And that is about what it looks like to provide students instructional scaffolds when they need it, to make sure that they can actually access the content in the materials without removing the rigor. Or so part one kind of lays the foundation, and then parts 2 through 4 really get into what does it look like to plan and enact lessons using high quality instructional materials in a way that is in accordance with their integrity, like integrity to those design principles that sit under them. As far as kind of the outcomes that we're hoping to see, we are, it sounds like the UTK folks, we have a pre-post assessment, and on there we have a series of instructional vignettes where that are designed to kind of plot candidates into the middle of a scenario and an actual lesson, and they have to look at like 2 different decisions a teacher might make and say which of these is more in accordance with the instructional decisions that sit at the heart of using high quality instructional materials. So the outcomes we're trying to see is, can they select and distinguish high quality instructional materials from those that are not and articulate why? We want to see, can they distinguish instructional decisions that are in line with the design principles of high quality instructional materials from those that are not and articulate why? And then we're also testing to see whether they've developed the skills to actually prepare to teach a lesson from a high quality, a curriculum that's been vetted as high quality. And then some of the particular teaching practices that we're focused on that we'd hope to see with real kids are moves like, do they know how to, once they've asked a question that's in the curriculum, do they know how to respond to a child's thinking in a way that kind of supports them in refining or extending their thinking? Do they know how to do a think aloud or provide modeling in the moment as an instructional scaffold to support a child in accessing the materials? So that's kind of the background on what we're doing. As far as the actual pilot, we're partnering with folks at UT Knoxville, Nashville Teacher Residency, Tennessee Tech, and Lipscomb. So we're piloting across those 4 institutions. And this fall, I think that Amy mentioned that we're on a different timeline than some of the other folks. So this fall, we have been really moving to develop all of these different materials. And what we're doing is, as we finish each part, we're asking the faculty who will be piloting in the spring, to actually, their asynchronous modules. So we ask them to complete them as if they were a teacher candidate. And then we do feedback interviews with them to talk about what's working, what's not, and then what adaptations might be important in their particular context. We're using those to revise so that the materials are revised by the time they're piloted in January. We're going to be piloting in the spring semester, so spring 2022. And during that, we'll be gathering data on both changes in teacher candidate knowledge through exit tickets and pre-post data, But then we're also embedding a survey at the end of each asynchronous module to learn about what the experience was like for candidates, of like, even if they're learning, if it's an awful experience, that would not be a win. So we want to get their feedback. And then we're doing the instructor interviews throughout this fall, but then we're also going to be doing a series of post-implementation feedback surveys to get instructors' take on their experience of actually using the materials. And I think the one other thing I meant to tell you was that we are providing the asynchronous modules, but coming out of COVID, we've heard from faculty that they really want to have like some synchronous component of this work, and that they want to be able to support their candidates and kind of like making sense of these really meaty modules and unpacking it. So there's an optional synchronous component that's like a bookend where they can preview the module and then do a debrief discussion afterwards. So some of our faculty will be piloting those, but everyone will be piloting the asynchronous component. Okay, that's all.
I do want to jump in and also say I'm incredibly impressed with what you've laid out as well. My question for you, though, in the pilot during the springtime, will the universities that are involved, will they be including all students who are in their EPPs or a select group of those? How will that work? And how many do you expect it to be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That varies by institution. So at Nashville Teacher Residency, for example, they have signed on to pilot the secondary ELA materials. So it's going to be just their ELA cohort, but everybody in their ELA cohort. Whereas at like Tennessee Tech, they have committed to piloting them in a sequence of methods courses that candidates are co-enrolled with in their junior year. So it'll be everybody in their junior year, but they've actually just talked to us about potentially piloting it in another program as well. So that might be expanding. So that was a long way of saying it depends on the institution, how many folks are going to be piloting the materials.
I thought that might be the case. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I had one question too. You had indicated that you're in a process right now developing your materials. So my question is, are you developing these from scratch, or, have you gone out to other states, best practices, or states that have done well, or where do these materials come from? Because in a short period of time, it seems like it's a lot of work to do.
I strongly agree with that last sentence, but I would say that there's a blend of what we're doing. So we definitely have looked across other states, but part of what we are negotiating is these are Tennessee specific EPP standards and Tennessee specific high quality instructional materials. So for example, we don't want to, there's kind of general best practices that we can pull from other resources, but we don't want to be pulling from states that are like really focused on a set of standards, for example, that Tennessee is not using in K-12 schools, because that could be confusing for candidates to negotiate.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Appreciate your time today. We'll transition. I believe I see Dr. Sherry Bell on the call, and she is one of the PIs on the second UTK Foundational Skills focused on special education interventionist K-8. So Dr. Bell, when you're ready.
Thank you. I was getting a message that I was muted. Can you hear me now? All right, thank you. So I am a colleague of Dr. Philippakis, and so there are some similarities in the two teams that developed these work somewhat together, but then there are also differences because ours is focused for special education. So similar to the integrated content project for early childhood and elementary, the UTK Special Ed and Foundational Skills project provides content in the form of modules, which our EPP's partners can integrate into existing coursework. you're probably aware that the vast majority of students with disabilities, including those with dyslexia, underperform peers with disabilities and literacy proficiency. So we also are very happy to be involved in this project. Our project authors include special education, audiology and speech pathology, and literacy professors and researchers from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and from Winthrop University in South Carolina. Thus far, we've developed 17 modules addressing special education law and policies, assessment, including Tennessee's Response Intervention Squared, Tennessee's recently adopted Universal Screener, characteristics of dyslexia, and knowledge and application across the range of foundational skills in accordance with the Tennessee Literacy Success Act, but also with the population of students with disabilities in mind. All of our modules address evidence-based practices and specific high leverage practices as identified by the Council for Exceptional Children. And you may have heard of CEDAR, the Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform Center. It's out of the University of Florida. CEC and CEDAR have identified 21 high leverage practices across 4 areas. The 2 most relevant for this project being assessment and instruction. For example, one high leverage instructional practice relates to the use of explicit instruction, and one high leverage assessment practice relates to the use of assessment data to determine effectiveness of instruction and make adjustments if needed. The modules also include specific considerations for culturally and linguistically diverse learners. They contain a pre-test, post-test, a reading or readings, a case study, an accompanying a PowerPoint, an accompanying caption video, and a transcript of the video to assure accessibility for various types of users. All the modules also include a detailed reference list and additional resources for further study or application. Our final module is actually a set of mini modules that we're continuing to expand, each one details specific application of a high leverage practice in one of the key areas of foundational literacy skills, for example, reading fluency or phonemic awareness. We'll continue to add mini modules for the second pilot phase in spring of 2022. The purpose of the project is to ensure special education pre-service teachers in Tennessee have the background, knowledge, and skills needed to teach students with disabilities to read and write in accordance with a growing research base on how literacy develops and how it is effectively taught. That is, teacher candidates who complete these modules will display an understanding of evidence-based content and pedagogical knowledge in literacy development, assessment, and instruction that underlies effective and equitable reading instruction, particularly with students with disabilities and with dyslexia. Our partners in the SPED integrated content project are UT Chattanooga, UT Martin, and Johnson University here in Knoxville. Thus far, with a total of 7 faculty across several different courses participating. In addition, we're piloting some of the content here at UTK as well. Thus far, after review by external experts and experts from the Tennessee Department of Education, our modules have been shared with EPP partners via both Google platform and the Canvas learning platform. Cross-monthly check-in meetings are underway. In addition, faculty and students are asked to provide feedback for each module implemented. Components of the modules will be revised based on EPP and another round of Tennessee Department of Education feedback, with a second round of piloting in spring 2022, with final revisions being, we anticipate making late spring and early summer 2022, with the goal of sharing with other EPPs across our state.
Once again, it's hard not to say thank you. I'm very appreciative of the work that you all are doing, and especially, the special education, all areas, obviously, when it comes to literacy, critically important, but of course, the major challenges that are in special education, and as you mentioned, students with dyslexia, et cetera. So I look forward to hearing more. I'd love to see each of your presentations. I'm trying to take copious notes, because it's one thing to listen to you and hear what you're saying, but to truly grasp everything that you said. I would appreciate it if we could get copies of all of the presentations, and thank you each for the work that you've done. I know we're not finished. I don't have any questions for you, Dr. Bell, except to say thank you very much for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Appreciate it. Okay, last but not least, Dr. Zach Stumbo from UTK will be sharing a bit on the trauma-informed instruction content and integrated content they are developing. Dr. Stumbo?
Hi. I just wanted to say hi and greetings to the State Board of Education and the other guests with us today. My name is Dr. Zach Stumbo, and I am representing the EPP Innovation Grant titled Tea and Tips, Creating and Sustaining Equitable Access for Trauma-Informed Instructional Practices for Educators. And we're based at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I am the full-time content creator for the project. Our other team members include Drs. David Chihak, Amelia Brown, and Carrie Dunn. And I'm pleased to share our progress today and give an update on our projected timeline. As we move forward from the pre-pilot from last semester into that, sorry, let me start over. As we move forward from the pre-pilot completed review from the data from last semester into the pilot, we have increased our focus on aligning the project to the EPP Literacy Standards in training and assessment. We believe the standards are central to the mission of trauma-informed instructional practices, and that aligning our project tightly to these standards will ultimately better support teachers in their ability to improve student outcomes. We believe that these standards will help teachers mitigate and prevent some traumas through more equitable and accessible literacy practices, which will ultimately reflect in their academic performances. We want to stress that the training we are developing is not just a theoretical information for pre-service teachers. We believe that it is actionable and applicable to the real-world classroom. We're proud to report that our collaboration and co-construction of the project is strong and reflective of the many types of post-secondary educational opportunities across Tennessee. Our higher education partners come from 6 EPPs with a broad regional perspective of Tennessee, and it includes public and private institutions. We estimate the participation of between 400 and 500 teacher and leadership education candidates in this pilot in Tennessee, across Tennessee, in the 2021 to 2022 academic year. The collaborative process is an ongoing and iterative design where our decisions are data-driven and made in the best interest of the stakeholders, and ultimately with a mind for the future students of Tennessee. In the spring, we will host 4 focus groups for program feedback. They'll be in Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, and Knoxville, where the participants and the LEA partners can offer feedback about the process. Looking forward, the pilot program will begin rolling out to some EPP partners next week. Some EPPs have elected to use Google Classroom, and some are using Canvas Catalog. We believe that this design is a strength, as it will allow us to examine the strengths and weaknesses of both platforms in our final report. We will continue to use data from the pilot to create a finalized material for the project. Currently, we're focusing on adding specialized touches to each of our 7 lessons that will include at least one Tennessee professional or Tennessee story to make the lesson more relatable and accessible for the participant teachers and teacher leaders and educational leaders. We want to thank you for your time today, and feel free to reach out to me since I'm the full-time project faculty on this, and you can reach me at my email, and that's zstumbo@vols.utk.edu. And if any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
Dr. Stumbo, of course, this is a critically important area too. There's no question about it. And I know that a lot of the school districts have worked diligently to ensure that their faculty have gone through some level of trauma-informed education or training, if you will. So as I think about the work that you're doing there's a question similarly to what Bob Eby asked earlier. Where is the, are you creating this, these modules, this information from the ground up, or are you gathering data from other areas of the state, of the country, rather, I should say? And have you partnered with LEAs to hear from them more specifically their ideas and suggestions of what you may include in the instruction? Is there any of that that's taken place?
So so this began with some graduate students at University of Tennessee who built a pre-pilot version of it that ran with, there were, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I believe there were 140 students in a methods course that started it, and almost 90 that finished all of it voluntarily last year. And so I went in and researched and pulled that apart myself. And that was the foundational data, or the foundational content. And so I have gone through and evaluated and looked at how good was this content, how could it be better, and all along I've been redoing that. The I is, or the goal, rather, the goal is for us to produce some original content, use what was there that came from places like the CDC, some government-led places, some content that was online from YouTube, but that can go away. So that's problematic because one of the videos is no longer exists. So we are using some of the grant money to produce new content. We've had to do it quickly, like slideshow videos, but we will be polishing up those videos as we go along and putting them into this pilot when we can. Of course, some of the schools want to start early, so they may have the rough draft videos that I've done so far, and maybe not the polished ones, but the content basically won't change. It just doesn't look as pretty right now as it can. And then, of course, I said that we want to have Tennessee professionals and Tennessee focus groups in those things. So right now we're working on getting rough draft focus groups with school. So some schools have gone through already one cycle of the trauma-informed training. And so we want those people to work and help us with sort of a focus group. This is different than our focus group on the research, right? I don't want that to get confused, but sort of go through some scenarios of how would you deal with students or certain trauma scenarios and make it more real life to Tennessee, because I really believe that we need to, if we're using Tennessee money and we're aiming this at Tennessee teachers, this doesn't need to be filled with videos from New York and California and Texas and other places. It needs to really hit home with Tennessee, and it needs to run with stories and people from Johnson City to Memphis. And so we're trying to find teachers that have been through that first cycle of the trauma-informed schooling and get them in there, especially for that lesson 7, where we have the grade bands, the different grade bands, and get some video content conversations of them talking about different scenarios, how would you deal with this, what instructional decisions. So right now I'm trying to do a rough draft and get that finished. And I have my resources going to get a rough draft of that on Zoom and a polished version of it for the final content. So yes, we're using some pre-made things. Some things were already in there from the pre-pilot, and we're polishing those. The major content that we're building is content focused on Tennessee schools, Tennessee children, Tennessee teachers, to make it relatable. And I think that's the buy-in for the teachers, right? I'm sorry, I can talk on and on about that.
I know, I love your passion. And I'm thinking about too, the teachers who have been in the classroom, and some of them who have gone through the training that's been provided across the state. But I think about the identification of a child who has gone through one trauma, multiple traumas, and we know that the more traumas they've had, the more difficulty they have in learning. So I'm just thinking about the end user and even framing it in reality of what happens. Because, you know, we often talk about this. I know I've talked about it in my career, is that I went to college, and then when I got in the real world, everybody's like, okay, so they taught you the book knowledge, but they didn't teach you the real world application. And I know that in education, we do, I think, a much better job than in other professions because of the sheer fact that we do have those opportunities, and you do not put somebody in the classroom without going through, you know, the teacher training, the, I'm sorry, internships and practicums and so on and so forth. So I'm just thinking about getting feedback from LEA, from teachers that are already experienced.
Sorry, I am reaching out to that network, especially the ones who've been through the trauma training. You know, I didn't go back to get my PhD until I taught for 10 years. So I'm very passionate about that and making sure that I don't lose that contact. And I mean, my own ACEs trauma score is really high. I grew up poor in Eastern Kentucky. So yes, I could talk about this all day.
Sure.
And even though I'm a Kentuckian, I'm super passionate about this remaining Tennessee connected. And I want, that's my number one thing that I spend my time on, is making sure that it relates to Tennessee teachers from Johnson City to Memphis. There has to be connection and buy-in.
So I have a question to follow up,
Yes.
is that I understand your passion, and maybe this question isn't just for you, but for all four. How do we evaluate how effective these courses are that we're putting together, these programs that we're putting together? Ultimately, we'll see them, you know, within the students, but that's probably years down the road. But what's your plan right now to evaluate, is this, you know, we're putting together quite an effort to develop, you know, foundational skills and early childhood and trauma, et cetera. How do you, or how do the universities evaluate the effectiveness of these programs?
So just quickly, and then I'll let the others do it, but we have built in assessment questions that vary, because we had assessment questions in the pre-pilot that we had, and we hadn't varied them enough, so the students quit answering them. But we have that built into that for the students to answer. And then part of ours are the focus group that we're meeting with, the 4 focus groups. And then I think it's part of follow-up in research. I think, you know, I'm a 1-year contract, but I think building in sustainability and making sure that the research in this, keeping it low cost so that the people can keep taking it, low cost to free, and keeping it sustainable, making sure that it's something that teachers can get their professional development credit for, making sure there's a payoff for it. That's how you keep it alive and keep it going, in my opinion.
I'll just add, I can add that I know both Dr. Philippakis and the project that I'm working with, we have pre and post tests for each module for our content. So we'll actually see how the students do. Now that's, you know, that's content that's in a class. It's not watching them out in the schools. But we will have that data. We also are collecting data from the implementers from all the EPPs, somewhat similar to what Dr. Stumbo was describing, also doing observations. So there's a lot that we're doing around getting information around the quality, but also then how the students actually perform on the in their mastery of the content.
Is your grant for 1 year also?
Yes.
Yes.
It's, you know, it seems to me that, I mean, this is great that we're developing this thing, but I would think that somehow we've got to get a follow-on grant to be able to evaluate and to make changes as needed. So I don't know who issues those grants or makes those decisions, but that's something that somebody ought to recommend. Is it shouldn't just be a 1 year thing. It needs to be continual.
So something I was about to add is that what you're addressing is, and what we're trying to address now, is feasibility of the content and implementation in the classroom. Because if we don't have that, if it's not feasible, instructors are not going to use it, and students will not use it because they will be burnt out. So we're trying to examine what type of tweaks and changes and revisions will make it feasible. But then the next goal is sustainable.
Right.
And in order to have something sustainable, you need to have these sources that are called professional development, and to assure that both instructors will utilize this content, but then students will also return back to this content when they are in classrooms, because it is not, evidence-based practices do not disappear once you have attained a degree. However, it would be wonderful if we were able to really test, as you shared, the content and randomly assign in order to tell what is the effect of this by those who do use the content, by those who do not.
Exactly.
Yes, that would be wonderful. But that, again, requires more than just a year.
Right. I understand. I think 1 year is, really doesn't get to the crux of the issue. So.
Right, but we can get some information on the feasibility for sure, and then to allow us to make revisions. And then we will get information from the instructors and from the students' data in order to tell how well prepared are they for the workplace.
Thanks.
Oftentimes, my experience has been that a grant is provided through the Department of Education, as an example, and in this case, and with the expectation that the recipient of that grant will be expected to carry forth the work. Was that part of the expectation when this grant was put out there for you all to apply for?
I'm sorry, when I said that I'm here for just a year, I'm a postdoctoral researcher, and that's almost always just a 1-year position. So when I said that, let me clarify that. That's, I'm free to apply for a permanent position if one opens up.
But again, for those who applied, though, I was just curious if you were told that in applying that there would be this expectation that you would continue to do the work on university dollars, or were you told that depending on the outcome of the work, there could be another grant opportunity? I've written grants in the past in other work streams, and that was part of the expectation almost every time. In order to continue this work, we wanted to start it, give you the seed money, but then the expectation was that you would find a way to continue the work, or they would provide you with another grant opportunity because of the outcomes from the grant. Does that make sense?
Yes,
it's my understanding with this grant is that it's not just going to disappear or stop.
Well, the grant is for a year, so we have the deliverables at the end of in May or June, I think, of 2022. That's a deliverable. And then we have already shared with the state the interest in implementing a larger scale study. However, the goal is to give these resources to the hands of our teachers to bring change now, because we have already changed. There is a change on the standards, so there has to be alignment of these instructions within the EPPs so that our teachers are prepared to address those standards. So I think that there is an urgency to do the best possible work through these 2 cycles of implementation for these to be deliverables for instructors to utilize in their instruction.
I've got a question. I'm not really sure how I say it without saying it wrong, so I apologize if I get the wrong tone. I've been on the board 10 years, and reading for Tennessee kids have been really bad the whole 10 years, and that's been 3 reading programs that we have initiated in order to address the reading deficit in Tennessee. And we're still here with those. Actually, those numbers hadn't changed any. And the thing that I see we got to do is not look at it. We need to know that what we're doing with teachers, whether they're coming up through the programs or they're already out in teaching, knows how to change what we're doing in order to yield a much better result. And I don't know that. Let me go back another. One of the previous programs was that we adopted was, and this is not this, but it gives you an idea of you know, kind of what I didn't know at the time is it's going to take 3 years to develop, and then it had to get started in pre-K. And you really didn't know the outcome until the end of the 3rd grade. You know, that was 7 years. And as we learned at the end of 7 years, it wasn't working. So we got to figure out really what's going to correct this thing and get it on the right path. And I think I am absolutely blown away, as Bob and Lillian are, about your all's approach. And but at the end of the day, we got to know as we're going it's going to work. And that probably sounds a whole lot more blunt than I intended to do. But
no, you are actually, I appreciate that you represent the challenge, and the challenge is we need to increase literacy, and that's not negotiable. And I am exactly thinking as bluntly as you are, that we need to prepare teachers who know the content so well that they can address the needs of every learner. And that's a commitment, and it's non-negotiable. So the challenge is that reading is difficult, and reading is not something that just develops through exposure. So there is a shift, I would say, in the philosophy and understanding of how reading develops. And reading develops through explicit and systematic instruction. And I think that now there is a targeted support through these initiatives to address this issue of reading, from what the universities do, what teachers are expected to do, what professional developments are in place, what parents are provided to support their children. So this initiative seems to be targeting the challenge of reading from multiple sides, from multiple areas, having the child at the center. So I am exactly as you are, as blunt as it can be, that I would like all teachers to address the needs of the students, and there is no excuse. We need to really take this seriously, that we cannot have any first grader finishing first grade without being able to read. We need to, and if they cannot, we need to know why, so we can intervene and we can support our learners.
amen.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I know we're at time for this particular session, but I just wanted to acknowledge the importance of continuing on the good work after the grant has ceased, and that's very much on the mind of the department, and what work we can do to engage our EPPs with LEA partners, since they are all doing the same work together, and be able to put those supports in place. So very much on the mind of the department, and we'll continue to move forward with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate each one of you being with us today and sharing the great work that you all are doing. And thank you, Dr. Insana, for bringing them to us today. Great discussion, and look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next, thank you to all the grantees who joined us today. I really enjoyed hearing more about your amazing work that you're doing. Our next section for this meeting, which is the last item before we get to our discussion with the TACTI board, is just a summary of the state board's presentations at the TACTI conference, which took place at the end of September. We gave 2 presentations at this conference. The first was an update on statewide EdTPA data. So we had given this presentation before, but we wanted to give the presentation again with the most recent cohort of data, which is 2018-19. We'll have 2019-20 data soon, but we're still in the process of processing that for the upcoming report card release. One of the key findings from this presentation is that Tennessee has done an excellent job of closing the score gap between white teachers and teachers of color on EdTPA. We now have 2 years in a row where the score gap between white teachers and teachers of color is small to non-existent. And I can tell you from looking at the national EdTPA data, on the national level, this is not the case. Nationwide, there is still a statistically significant gap with teachers of color scoring about 2 points lower on average. So here in Tennessee, you can see in the most recent cohort, there was exactly the same median score, and the mean score was only different by 1/10 of a point, which it was not statistically significant. Looking specifically at subgroups within teachers of color, we saw that our Black teachers in 2018-19 had an average score of 46.3. So they were just a fraction of a point below the average score for white teachers. And our Hispanic and Latino teachers had an average score of 47.5. So they actually had a higher average score than white teachers. We know that this is not happening by chance. This is a combination of the candidates themselves working hard and also our educator preparation programs working extremely hard to provide all of the support that these candidates need to perform well on this. It is a very complicated and multi-part performance-based assessment. As Amy mentioned earlier, we do think that this assessment is very important and is aligned with the team rubric and is a great way to get teachers into some of the mindsets that they will need when they are in the classroom. But we're very glad to see that the previous gaps that we had been seeing between white teachers and teachers of color seem to have gone away. Let's hope that that stays the same in the future, and congratulations to all of our EPPs for having these excellent results.
That is just absolutely phenomenal data. Absolutely mind-boggling data and great data.
All right, thank you. Our other presentation at TACTI was about licensure assessment preparation, which includes preparation for EdTPA, but also for the content assessments that teachers have to take for their specific subject area. We had a research fellow this past summer, Brianna Summers from Vanderbilt University, who conducted interviews with 6 Tennessee EPPs to discuss the ways that they help their candidates get prepared for these assessments and to talk about what were the major barriers that candidates face to doing well on these assessments. The 3 main categories of barriers that came up were timing, cost, and test familiarity. So each of these tests have a cost associated with it. EdTPA, I believe, costs $300, so it is rather expensive. Praxis subject assessments are often around $150, $170, depending on the subject area. So that was one concern. Timing is related to like when within their program the candidates actually take these assessments. There's sometimes cases where candidates wait till the last minute to do all of their assessments and then they feel overwhelmed. So many EPPs are having a system now where they encourage their candidates to do their tests in a more spaced out manner so that it is less overwhelming, and that also helps with the cost because they're not having to pay for them all at the same time. And of course, familiarity with the test is very important for both the traditional content area assessments and also for EdTPA, which is a complex performance-based assessment that may be different from any type of assessment that the candidate has ever done before in their life. So we know from our interviews with EPPs that they leverage specific strategies to ensure students are prepared to pass their assessments. Examples of these include having interactive checklists of licensure requirements, which may include recommended timelines for when to take certain assessments, perhaps when the content course is freshest in your mind, or make sure that you have some of your assessments done before you start student teaching so you don't have to worry about them while you're student teaching, etc. Many programs are offsetting assessment costs by collecting lab fees, which students can use their financial aid to pay for, and then they issue vouchers that cover the cost of assessments. In most cases, that's used for EdTPA and not for the content assessments, just because the EdTPA is the largest single expense. Some EPPs are even leveraging grant funds or endowment funds to help cover costs, which I think is great, but especially if it's a grant fund, it may not be sustainable in the long term. Another thing we saw EPPs doing is incentivizing their faculty to take relevant assessments themselves. They can either do this just like a student would by registering for the test, going to the test center, doing the test like in the actual live environment, or they can do it through an online platform, ETS, which makes the practice assessments, has online practice assessments that very closely mimic the actual assessments. So the faculty can do those as well, just so that they have a really good direct experience with what it's like to take that test, what subjects are emphasized, how the questions are posed, and can align their coursework accordingly. Also, we saw that EPPs are using disaggregated data to drive their own improvement, particularly for candidates who come in from diverse backgrounds, have different levels of academic preparation, or are in challenging licensure areas such as secondary math, secondary science, and physical education is one area that we've talked about recently as being a challenging licensure area. So both this presentation, the licensure assessment preparation presentation, and the EdTPA presentation, the full slides for those are available to you on request. I can easily send those to you if you are interested in seeing them.
Erica, this how EPPs are working to improve their assessment prep is really, really good. Yeah, on the CPA exam, I think now it used to be you take your CPA exam and you oftentimes a candidate would find that they didn't pass one of the pieces. It's common now, and certainly at UT, for candidates to take all 4 parts at different times, and including different times in their 5th year. So I think that's a smart way to go about it. But figuring out ways, however we get it paid for, God, it would be cheap to society to figure out a way to cover that cost.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make, Mike, is that it really bothers me that cost is affecting people from being able to take the exam. And our shortage of teachers, particularly in particular endorsement areas, et cetera, it seems, and in the commercial world, like you're saying with a CPA exam or professional engineering license or something like that, the companies will pay for that, and even to the extent maybe you take the exam and if you pass it, then they reimburse you, and so
Yeah.
that might be more incentive for the teachers to be able to be sure that they pass the exam if they're going to get reimbursed. What I would like to know is how much are we talking about on an annual basis within the state of Tennessee that teachers spend on dollars for endorsement assessments? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $10,000? And then what is the return for that with regard to being able to put teachers in the pipeline? Amy, is that something that we could get?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I see Erica taking notes. I don't know that we could get an exact figure, but we could certainly look at some back of the napkin of looking at if you have X many elementary teachers who all had to take the two praxis exams for this much and EdTPA for that much, about how much would it be? I would encourage you all, staff will certainly dig into it further, but perhaps talk to our legislative affairs director about if there's any potential interest from legislators of thinking about ways to work the state budget to support teachers, whether it's in high need content areas or is it a reimbursement? I think there's lots of different ways we could approach it, but we'll try to get you some of that information and potentially reach out to some of our partners at the testing vendors to see if maybe they have an average handy.
I mean, yeah, having that information would be a value, and I agree talking to the legislators, but it would be nice to have the information before you go to the legislators.
Sure.
You know, this is the ballpark that we're talking about, and this is the benefit that the state of Tennessee would receive if we did something. And maybe, I don't know if other states do it or not.
I agree with that. And I think the other piece of this is, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right, go ahead.
The other
No, I was
piece,
just gonna add, go ahead.
no, I'm wanting you to finish. I couldn't hear your last statement.
Well, I didn't start, I was starting at the same time. I thought Bob was finished, so I wanted Bob to finish, and then Mike, you can go next. And
Okay,
I'll,
well, yeah,
No, I was wanting to know, I was asking you to repeat what you said.
yeah. She was waiting for me to finish, though. She thought I was finished. I wasn't quite finished. So,
Okay.
anyway, what I was saying is, I think, you know, we may be I don't know if other states do that or not, but if, you know, maybe we're one of the few states or maybe the only state that might offer that. Again, that would help us from the standpoint of losing teachers to our border states, which I hear about all the time in these advisory council meetings. So I think it's worthwhile getting that information so that we can have a conversation about it. That's all.
and I was going to add that sizing it is the right thing to do. I think understanding the numbers is very important. And I think that when we get into the discussion with the TACD Executive Board, I think it's, if we all approach the legislature, I think that if it's coming from Ed Prep and they see it as a challenge to completers getting their fully getting licensed because of the cost, the barriers to the cost. If we're coming at it from our angle, I think that if there's enough support that says this is a challenge, this is an opportunity, that perhaps we could move the needle in the right direction. So I just wanted to say I agree with you and add that couple of comments too.
Oh, I agree.
Mike, did you want to add?
No, I think I think the number is going to be a lot less than I don't think it's going, when they hear the number, they're not going to gag. I think it's going to be a very manageable number. In fact, a small rounding error number.
We just got a chat from Jenny Hahn, said the current cost for all individuals seeking the current cost for an individual seeking a K-5 license is $712. That's if they pass all assessments on the first attempt. So $1,000 a teacher, basically.
That's a lot of money to the teacher or the candidate.
Absolutely.
It's not that much money to the state.
Our point, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm. All right, thank you for that. And I think we're a little behind schedule at this point, so we want to make sure that we have time to talk with our TACD Executive Board members. So let me know if you have any further questions about these presentations, and I will be happy to share the full slide deck with you. For now, let's see, I would like to move on to our discussion with the TACD Executive Board. I know we have TACD President-elect David Shihak is on the line, and several of the other Executive Board members have joined us as well.
Yes, thank you. And I know there's several folks from the executive board too that can kind of jump in. And as always, I just want to thanks for this opportunity to be a part of it. First, I want to say thank you to the Department of Ed and the State Board, Amy and her team, Annie and her team for coming to TACD, you know, providing the updates, the guidance, and quite frankly, just always being available and supportive to all our needs. And it's just wonderful to have such great candid conversations and really to kind of dive into the issues that you all are discussing. For example, you know, it's about $1,000, as you know, Mr. Edwards kind of said, because there's also a core praxis exam that's needed upon entry into a teacher ed profession. Plus, there's professional liability insurance. Plus, there's a background check. Plus, there's gas to and from all of my wonderful clinical settings. So, I've always kind of put that number about 1,000 to 1,500. You know, just ballparking it. And it also depends on dual endorsements. So as we push more dual endorsements, that's an additional $160 regarding licensure exams. So with that in mind, one of the areas that I wanted to talk about was the TPA cut score. And where TACTI's kind of standing at is really supportive of maintaining the current cut score of 40. You know, we do have some of those concerns about the increased scores, you know, really just kind of given the great challenges, especially now for schools to hire certified teachers. You know, I think raising this cut score may further these challenges even more. You know, I agree that COVID continues to present a challenge. I know at our EPP and many other EPPs, we're trying to be as flexible as possible to allow our candidates to also serve as subs, because another great area that schools need and our partners need are substitute teachers. And so our folks are trying to fill that void without sacrificing that preparation quality. But quite frankly, the increase in score for EPPs, this could be the difference of recommending somebody for licensure or not. This could be the difference, or a school district, of hiring a certified teacher or not. You know, I do really appreciate Erica Light's comments about the national, and I find that very concerning still, the national trend on the TPA of showing a lot of the disparities. And in their June 21st report, I'm just going to summarize it that, you know, the outcome disparities based on the demographic communities, as they say, increases as the cut score increases. And TPA rationalizes this outcome disparity by stating that only a few states, including Tennessee, have the higher cut score that show the corresponding higher outcome disparities. So I'm proud of our commitment to excellence. But, you know, I also don't want it to become a barrier for folks to become a teacher. You know, our candidates do a lot of things in order to become a licensed teacher. And one of those things is successfully pass the TPA. This is my first time presenting here. I know Trisha's always kind of presented before, so I don't know the rules of order.
It's a pretty free-flowing conversation, David.
Good.
Don't feel bound by ceremony.
Oh, good. I like more Bob's rules than Robert's orders of rules, so I appreciate that all very much. But you know, y'all touched on a lot of many other things that were really near and dear to us. You know, I think reconciling that add-on endorsement, you know, it being tied to the EPP, you know, we want to make sure that the report card reflects the preparation that we prepared for that candidate. That if they were prepared for history, they pass history. They want to go into physics, go for it. You know, we definitely need more physics teachers out there, but we didn't prepare them to teach and become a physics teacher. So, you know, trying to reconcile that so that report card accurately reflects the, you know, candidates that we're producing, I think is most important. Job embedded, that's been an area of also looking at the praxis test score. My background is special education. We've been running alternative job embedded since I've been here. And just another area to kind of, I think, wrestle around with. I really did like the conversation about TPP. You know, I think some of the issues that kind of jumped out at me immediately, and I look forward to reading more about it, is kind of a lot of the conversation that Ms. Rebbe and Mr. Edwards were bringing up in terms of continuous improvement, impact data. Again, our report card is publicly posted. We're expected to include Penn Atlas data. So we're looking at, you know, TVOS data. We're adding observational data that's, you know, kind of posted that drives our continuous improvement model, as well as our ability to operate as an EPP. So I'm sometimes just a little concerned when we just say, hey, they passed the praxis exam. Think of all the special educators that we have licensed out there that passed the practice exam. We've been running alternative programs. So as a special ed teacher, there's a difference between passing the test and then actually performance of the job. And so I really like that idea where we were thinking about, okay, if they're in the job, what's their level of effectiveness? What are some of those value added outputs? And that's not the end all be all. I get that with observational kind of team observations or Tiger, or, you know, to kind of supplement that. But that's where I've always applauded this group, State Board, of course, Department of Ed, of trying to focus really on outcome orientation. You know, less on the input, you know, show me the outcome, show me the data. I really appreciated the discussion there at the end regarding, okay, after all these trainings that we develop, what's next, you know, and how do we really measure the effectiveness of the literacy modules or the trauma-informed modules? And I have some ideas on that front too, but you know, I think that's a really great empirical question: is how effective are they? You know, it can't be the one and done. You know, we've always looked at it as a way to kind of supplement, or the flipped classroom that Zoe talked about, that, you know, we can provide more opportunities for that practice. But I think ultimately we got to see more kids reading. We have to see fewer suspensions, fewer disciplines, greater attendance, more teachers who are trained in trauma-informed practices, schools that adapt that policy. That also relates to teacher attrition, teacher retention, regarding working with kids that have such challenging needs in the area of that trauma-informed. You know, it's not because I can't teach, it's because just some of those other factors that I feel like I wasn't equipped with, that we hope now that they will be more equipped with. Let's
Kim,
get,
I think Kim has a comment in the chat about thinking about the funding and the time we currently spend on assessments. Could those things be repurposed on literacy? Because if she's seen, if you're struggle to passing these exams, you're also going to struggle to teach literacy. Is that something, David, or others on the line, that you've seen as well?
You know, I'll tell you, I mean, honestly, with our ETPA, where we've run it, and we've been an early adopter, and, you know, we've correlated our high performers in that area of ETPA, and having cohorts of 1, 2, and 3 years, you know, we look more for, we look to have that coming back. You know, really, it's just kind of a big old scatter plot. You know, I mean, it's all over the place, where candidates who have scored very high, sometimes, you know, their scores have been lower, or kids who have scored lower, their value added scores have been very high, you know, and, you know, so I think there's, you know, there's more to that. I pass this test, and to see that kind of benefit, you know, that's where other things of that context of the school, the training, the leadership, the coaching. We talk about high quality instructional materials. We teach that at all of our EPPs. However, every school system is going to do a little bit differently. So it's kind of onboarding them to those kind of practices and the culture of that school. That's where I'm kind of really excited about getting into that space of that more trauma informed, which I think has been an issue that is underlined. You know, a lot of these kids are just trying to get them a little bit over. It's hard to learn how to read if I come from an unhappy situation.
One thing, David, if I could,
please jump in.
Hey, this is Renee Murley from UTC. One thing that we've been trying to do recently, and we're going to have to dig a little deeper, is just to record and collect data on individuals who decide maybe the last semester that they want to go a non-licensure route. And we're trying to determine what are the reasons for that. A lot of it is financial, because they can't afford to take assessments. Some of it is obviously they decide at the end that maybe teaching is not for them. But I didn't know if that might be something looking forward, Amy and Erica, if you would like maybe for some of our EPPs to start looking at that, because that would be something to contribute to the conversation, to really determine what are some of the reasons why our completers are not making it to the end. Is it this financial piece that if someone happens to take or need to take a test more than one time, financially, that's a barrier. And then reaching into this pot of money of almost $1,000, if we're looking at dual licensed programs, is it just the pure cost of these assessments? So that might be something of interest if others are also collecting some of that data.
That would be very important information to have, especially if we're going to go to legislature.
I will add that I would hope the state would have some leverage with ETS, given the number of exams that Praxis has versus a state of Georgia that built their own. We were also awarded the additional grants in special education and in the area of mathematics. And I approached our representative saying, hey, we're about to license, 3,600 people, any deals can you give us? Is there any, if we buy 1,000, is it cheaper than $170 per exam? And I was told no. So, I assumed there'd be not much of a benefit for a handful, but I was getting into the 1,000 range, and I thought I might have had some leverage, but no, I didn't. But that's a significant barrier. I mean, just kind of thinking back to a lot of the first generation students that we have. I mean, we're fortunate in Knoxville to have some amazing scholarships, but I know a lot of our other smaller EPPs don't have, that kind of resource. And that's assuming if everything goes well, that the car doesn't break down, you're not late on your mortgage or your apartment, and everything else seems to go fine.
This conversation just brings to light to me this, we're sitting here in the final moments of this meeting, and there's so many rich ideas that are coming forth just from each of you speaking to us today, and hearing from you is critically important. And so I'm sitting here thinking, what do we need to do differently so that we have more time to talk with you, and not just talk, get action, and find out what are the top ticket items from your side of the fence, the top 5, the top 10, whatever they are. Because if we leverage together, what you were saying, and I should call you David, but Dr.
David, no, David's fine. David Chiak, yeah.
That if, everybody together is leveraging, because to me, it's all in the numbers, and it's all in the collective voice. We're in this together. We cannot do it alone. And if you stay in your lane and we stay in our lane, and the LEAs are in their lane and everybody's doing their thing, we don't bring it together to affect positive change. And I think we all desire to do that. And so I'm just thinking about how do we do that, because to take the last 15 or 25 or 30 minutes of this committee meeting is not going to cut it. So I think we need to challenge ourselves at the state board to try to figure that out, so that we do come to some action based on the things that you said today. I know our people are taking copious notes. We have a great team. I know the department members who are on here with us today that are hearing this conversation care deeply about all of these things as well. So what can we do going forward, not just today, but going forward? Take what we heard today, but going forward, because there are things today we have to expound upon beyond where we've been.
It was a great, what you bring up is exactly what we were talking about, Tacti. How do we get our voices out better? How do we partner better? I mean, this is one step. This wasn't always the case where you had Tacti, a part of the working group. So that's a baby step, but how do we kind of, capitalize that? And I think one of the things the DOE has done is, really broken down those barriers between an EPP and an LEA. I mean, quite frankly, our partnership agreements are I think, stronger than ever. I mean, in terms of, again, those candid conversations, in terms of preparation. I mean, I'm emailing some of our LEAs going, hey, this student needs an extra hour. Is a job embedded, but, they also work a second job. They have family and they need some time during the day. And balancing short-term needs for long-term goals, they understand. And we're struggling with that same question. How do we really kind of continue this momentum and strengthen this momentum? I know TACTI board, we do have, some little grants and funds available that I think we need to exercise better in terms of working, with you all and working with the legislators and the DOE and all the stakeholders, quite frankly. As those have always heard me, I always say birth to 16, it's the whole pipeline.
Definitely.
One
Thank
of
you for those comments. Go ahead, Mike.
one of the things that to just take it, one of the things that what Lillian was saying a little bit further is that it's important for us to hear where the problems are. You guys really are pretty good at also telling us possible suggestions for solutions. And that's a big deal to us because for us just to know where the problems lie only gets us about halfway there. And we may or may not agree with the solutions, whole or in part, but it sure makes us a lot smarter hearing them. And if it solves the problem, we're going to be for it.
Right.
So the closer we get, the better.
And I think the whole board and really every EPP is trying to always focus that, solution orientation. I mean, when we talk about, I think Erica was there and Amy were, when I was saying, yes, we're advocating, but be solution oriented. I mean, it's not good just to poke at all the problems. We all know what the problems and some of those issues are, and they're complex, they're not easy. But, how do we kind of continually move forward? And, maybe more small little breakout. I mean, I know I don't know all the rules and regulations, but, more of this, I think is helpful.
Well, and Dr. Hawkins gave a suggestion in the chat. Could we have an advisory council, kind of like the EPP report card advisory group? It would give us a formal way to get together on a regular basis. So I think that's an opportunity we need to explore because I know, and we all know, that when we come together and get outside of our silos and we hear and we come up with solutions, and you all, as Mike said, you all do a great idea of giving us the solutions. But I know that when we come together, one idea spawns another thought of the creative solution. And if we don't come together, we are not going to get the solutions that we need, or it's going to take a lot longer. So I say to our team, let's take a look at that and see what it would take to do another advisory council and who would be those participants. And I certainly welcome that idea.
Yes, I know that the Department of Education also has their educator preparation working group, which they discuss their annual reports, but they also discuss broader topics related to ed prep. So another option would be, instead of creating a new group, we could consider maybe like broadening the scope of the group that we already have to include other topics aside from just the ed prep report card is another option.
I agree, Erica. I was thinking along the same lines and have it something where it meets more regularly throughout the year and not just in the report card production phase. We will certainly think through that as a staff. The tricky part will be how to include our members in the ongoing discussions, because as you all know, if we have more than one board member on it, it does, become a public meeting, which is totally fine. We're happy to have them. It's just a little bit more logistical effort, but we're certainly happy to continue working on that together.
Well, I welcome exploring how we can make it happen. Let's get some action, and I understand we have to be careful. You are absolutely right. But if we can figure a way we haven't thought of before, and if it means this particular subcommittee is part of that, we live stream these and we devote more time. It's challenging. So I think we have to be very thoughtful about how we go about that and still get the outcomes and the end results that we're all seeking to have. So
I've been pretty silent here at the end, listening to everybody. Let me just say this, is that by serving on the EPP Advisory Council, I would support whether you bring it into that or you set up a separate one, because to me, to have the group that's together for that advisory council brings in several stakeholders is a very important session for me we're going to be making these decisions to hear what these stakeholders are saying and get together and put together appropriate plans. So something like that, Kim, Dr. Hawkins, thanks for your suggestion. Something like that would be great.
I think I can speak for the rest of the team, so correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I know this TACTI Executive Board would be willing to serve in any capacity to continue to be a voice to help contribute to those conversations, because we try to have representation across throughout the state and the regions and private schools and public schools and so forth. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing, Renee. This is Kim Hawkins.
And our executive board kind of represents that. We try to make sure we have that representation of across the regions, large, small, little, private, public.
Very good. Excellent discussion. Any other comments from our TACTI friends? I'm glad that.
Appreciate you all and allowing us to attend and have a voice. Really appreciate it.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
I was going to echo the same thing. Thank you all so much.
I'm so glad that somebody very wise on our staff recommended that we do this, and I'm delighted that we're continuing. Thank you all very much. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Erica. Is there anything else that you wanted to say at this juncture before we get into?
No, I don't have anything else to add, so we can move on to wrap up and adjournment.
Okay, well, I think I've said a lot of comments along the way in the closing discussion here with the TACTI Executive Board. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. A great discussion. Thank you to each of our presenters. Erica Light, you did an excellent job. Amy Owen, Dr. Annie Insana, our special guest, who were the grantee recipients, and all of our members of the TACTI board who also spoke today. Thank you so much. Sarah Morrison, Dr. Sarah Morrison, is there anything you want to add before we close?
No, again, I echo all the comments. Really rich discussion. I always find myself thinking about things differently coming out of these subcommittee meetings and really learning as much as we put in terms of the preparation. So thanks to everyone for your really great participation today. We've got lots of things to chew on and some next steps, I'm sure, coming.
And I would be very remiss if I did not say thank you to Mr. Mike Edwards and Mr. Bob Beebe. Great discussion. I think we all key off of one another. One idea spawns another within our membership here on the board, on this committee. So thank you very much. And without further comments, unless Mike or Bob have anything to say.
This is an A+ meeting.
Absolutely. And thank you, Chairman Hargrove, for leading this too. We appreciate all that you do. But I agree with Mike. This is, every time when we finish this meeting, I've always say what value it is.
It's all the highly engaged people that participate with us, everybody that's on this committee, as well as all of our partners. So thank you all very much. And without further ado, we will officially adjourn. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Goodbye.